Okay, let's just dive right in. We're looking at a story today that, it really pushes the boundaries of what seems physically possible.
It really does. It's a situation that is so fundamentally dire, so hopeless, that every human instinct, every logical fiber of your being would just say, it's over.
Right. Give up. Despair. There's no way out.
To really get it, you have to try and put yourself there. Actually picture the scene. It's past midnight.
The darkest part of the night.
Exactly. And the air is cold, it's heavy, you're in the inner prison, so it probably smells awful. Imagine that sensory experience. You're Paul, or you're Silas.
And your back is just raw. It's bleeding from a flogging. And this wasn't some back alley beating.
No, this was official. Delivered with Roman rods. It was a severe, state-sanctioned, and profoundly humiliating punishment.
And the torture doesn't even stop when the beating does. You're then thrown into this inner prison. What exactly does that mean in a Roman context? Is it just another cell?
Not at all. The inner prison was the dungeon of the dungeon. It was the deepest, the darkest, structurally the most secure part of the whole complex.
So, likely underground.
Often, yes. Subterranean. You'd be led down a steep flight of steps. There's no light. There's absolutely no comfort. And forget about getting any kind of quiet rest.
But the crucial detail, the one that really paints the picture of agony, is the immobilization.
Ah, yes. The stocks. The source material mentions their feet were locked in stocks, the sippus. And we need to be clear, these weren't like modern handcuffs.
Not just cuffs, right?
No, they were designed to stretch the limbs, to force the body into an incredibly painful, unnatural posture.
Which would just exacerbate the pain from the fresh wounds on your back.
Constantly. Any movement, even just trying to shift your weight, would be sheer torture.
And on top of all that physical pain, your future is... it's sealed. It's behind iron bars. This isn't a holding cell you're getting out of in the morning.
This is the end of the line, absolutely. For two foreign guys who just disrupted a major local business interest, there's no lawyer coming.
No appeal. No friend is going to slip a bribe to a Roman guard to get you out of the inner prison.
It's just not happening. There is no physical, no logical, no human way out of this. The text establishes this profound sense of finality right from the start.
Everything is screaming despair.
Yeah.
Exhaustion. Yeah. Screaming out in pain would be the most natural response.
And yet, that is the precise moment where the whole story just pivots. It takes this incredibly sharp, paradoxical turn.
And that's the paradoxical act we're focusing on this deep dive. Instead of screaming, instead of cursing their fate, they did something else entirely.
We started to sing.
They started to sing. It's the ultimate counterintuitive act of defiance.
And that's what we're going to dissect today. This deep dive is all about that transformative account in Acts chapter 16. We're looking at the journey from that public suffering, that profound imprisonment, to this sudden, violent, divine intervention, and ultimately, deliverance.
So our mission today is to really explore that radical idea. Not just what happened historically, but how an extreme act of praise, when all physical circumstances are shouting it's over, can fundamentally change your fate.
How does worship actually trigger a reaction that Roman law and physics would declare totally impossible?
And we have to start with the setup, because the road to that prison cell was, weirdly, a direct result of their obedience.
That's the first paradox. They didn't end up there because they did something wrong in a spiritual sense. They ended up there because they did something incredibly right, but it went up against a very powerful economic interest.
Okay, let's start there. The root cause of all this suffering. Because you're right, it's where the tension really begins. They weren't rioting or anything like that. What was the specific action that got them arrested, stripped, beaten, and locked away?
The source material is crystal clear on this. Paul cast out a spirit of divination from a slave girl in the city of Philippi.
And this girl wasn't just, spiritually oppressed. She was a financial asset, a piece of property.
A tool for profit, exactly. Paul's act was one of spiritual liberation. He freed her from this demonic influence that allowed her to fortune tell.
And boom, instantly you have this collision. Divine purpose smacks right into furious financial opposition.
Freedom for her, yes, but for her owners, they just lost their entire revenue stream.
It's such a powerful conflict.
Oh, absolutely. You have to understand the business model here. In the ancient world, Divination, fortune telling, it was a big deal. It could be a very lucrative, ongoing source of income.
Especially for people exploiting superstition and fear.
Precisely. The spirit that was in her provided these consistent, profitable predictions. The second that spirit is gone, so is the business.
So the owner's concern is purely financial. It's immediate, it's concrete. They don't care that this girl is now free and whole.
Not one bit. They care that the money tap has been turned off. And so they weaponized the Roman legal system purely to get revenge and, scare off anyone else from disrupting their commerce.
And how do they do that?
Well, they drag Paul and Silas before the magistrates. They trump up these false accusations, saying they're advocating customs that are unlawful for Romans, stirring up the city.
And the crowd just goes along with it.
Immediately, the crowd and the magistrates, it shows this terrifying lack of due process. The response is swift and it is brutal.
Let's detail that brutality, because I think we really need to feel the depth of their physical agony to appreciate the praise that comes later.
We do. First, they were publicly stripped. That's an act designed for maximum public humiliation.
And then the text says they were severely flogged.
Right, and that phrase refers to a specific Roman practice, beating them with rods, the vergae. These were bundles of elm or birch rods, usually carried by the lictors who attended the magistrates.
So this isn't just a quick whipping.
Not at all. This is a harsh, state-sanctioned beating. It's designed to break the skin, cause deep tissue damage. They would have been left lacerated, bleeding profusely.
And even that wasn't enough for the authorities. They escalate the security. They throw them into the inner prison. Tell us again why that specific detail matters so much here.
The inner prison was the most secure part of the facility. It wasn't the general population area. It was deep, built to be escape-proof. And because it was often underground, it was cold, damp, no airflow, no light.
So the environment itself was part of the punishment.
It was intended to crush the spirit, absolutely.
And then the jailer gets his orders. Guard them carefully. That's not a suggestion, is it?
It's a direct command from the magistrates. And to make sure there's no movement, no chance for them to even tend to their wounds, and certainly no escape, their feet are locked tightly in the stocks.
And as you said, the stocks, the sippus, were instruments of ongoing torment.
Yes. Just try to imagine it. Fresh bleeding wounds on your back so you can't lie down without agony. And at the same time, your feet are stretched and immobilized, probably keeping your body in some bent, awkward position.
Every single physical circumstance was engineered for maximum pain, maximum humiliation, and minimum hope.
And that state of constant, unbearable physical duress, that is the stage for what happens next.
Which sets up this first really profound paradox. Let's call it the crisis of faith. Here you have two men who followed a divine instruction. They were successful in their work. They freed a soul.
Right.
And their reward is the most brutal state persecution and personal agony imaginable. They were exactly where obedience had led them.
And that's the ultimate challenge for any person of faith, isn't it? If your belief system promises protection or reward for doing good, a story like this just shatters that simplistic expectation.
It really does. Faithfulness leads directly to the darkest moment, a most isolated place. Why would God allow that, especially right after they performed a miracle in His name?
If I'm Paul in that moment, I am seriously questioning the strategy. Honestly, did I mishear God? Was freeing that one slave girl worth this? The flogging, the stocks? It seems like a terrible return on investment.
And that's the very human perspective the story confronts head on. The implication for anyone listening is so critical here. Their suffering wasn't a sign that God had abandoned them.
No. It was a necessary prerequisite for a much larger, completely non-obvious purpose. Their pain wasn't about some failure on their part. It was a required piece of evidence for someone else's breakthrough.
So their suffering serves a higher external function? But wow, it takes an incredible leap of spiritual maturity to get from the agony of the stocks to accepting some higher purpose.
It does. Before we even get to that purpose, let's talk about the radical action they took right there at their absolute lowest moment.
The transition in the story is so sharp, and it's all defined by timing. The source zeroes in on the specific hour, about midnight.
And we have to dwell on midnight for a moment. Psychologically, physically, it is the absolute bottom, the nadir of human resilience.
It's the time of deepest cold, deepest exhaustion. It's when hope is naturally at its lowest point.
It wasn't morning, when the sun might bring a tiny sliver of relief. It wasn't early evening when there's still some residual warmth from the day. This was a moment of absolute total darkness, both physically and metaphorically.
They'd been beaten, thrown in a dungeon, locked in stocks. They were probably starving, exhausted.
It's the hour when despair whispers its loudest lies. And yet, this is when they chose to act.
And what was that action exactly? The text says they were praying and singing hymns to God. We need to analyze that. What does singing hymns even mean in this context? Is this some formal, remembered liturgy?
Or is it a desperate, spontaneous outpouring? I think it was an act of profound surrender, no matter the specific format. They chose to activate their faith with their voices, even when their bodies were screaming in pain.
The worship itself is what's key here. It doesn't seem like a transactional prayer like, Lord, get us out of here now.
Exactly. It wasn't a petition for immediate escape. It was a declaration of trust, despite the prison. They were acknowledging God's sovereignty, even with their feet locked in wood.
They were praying through surrender, yielding the outcome entirely.
Can you imagine the physical discipline that takes? To focus your breath, your voice, on worship when every nerve ending in your body's on fire? It's a deliberate choice of spirit over physical sensation.
It's a remarkable distinction. They took control of the one thing the Romans couldn't touch: their attitude, their spirit, their voice.
They chose to honor God with hymns instead of complaints. And here's the element that takes this from a private, personal devotion to a major spiritual event.
It was public.
It was public. The source explicitly says that the other prisoners were listening to them.
They became the loudest testimony. This wasn't some quiet, private murmuring. This was loud enough to carry through the cold stone walls of the inner prison.
And think about who their audience was.
Hardened criminals, thieves, maybe murderers, people who knew Roman justice and Roman brutality inside and out.
They had never seen anything like this. They had seen prisoners weep, curse, maybe plan an escape. They had never, ever seen prisoners with freshly flogged backs, locked in stocks, singing hymns of joy at midnight.
They were giving involuntary proof that their faith held up even when the Roman system had done its absolute worst to them. I mean, what kind of power does that suggest to the other prisoners who are listening?
It suggests a God who is bigger than the physical laws of the prison. It's the highest form of resilience, witnessed by the most skeptical audience you could possibly assemble.
And this connects so directly to the listener's life, doesn't it? It's our second open loop. Your praise and pain is never wasted. Someone else is always listening.
Always. Paul and Silas' suffering wasn't just for them, it was a public spectacle, witnessed by people who needed that exact demonstration of transcendent faith.
We often wait until we're fixed or whole to share our story. But the power of their testimony was maximized because of the chains, because of the flogging, because of the midnight despair.
That's what made it authentic. Their worship was evidence. It was an involuntary sermon on endurance. And this leads us to the core causality of the whole event. The undeniable lesson here is
They didn't praise because the chains fell.
the chains fell because they praised. Worship triggered the change.
That shifts the physics of the entire narrative. The singing wasn't a reaction to a miracle, it was the cause of it.
It wasn't God just having a sympathetic response to their suffering. It was a powerful cause and effect reaction to their radical act of surrender and trust.
In physical terms, they provided the input, this frequency of faith-driven worship, rising above the frequency of despair.
And heaven provided the output of violent physical intervention. It was a sequence. That moment of radical praise in the face of impossible odds was the catalyst. It initiated the most dramatic physical disruption imaginable.
They changed the atmosphere, and that atmosphere literally changed the earth beneath their feet.
And the change wasn't gradual. It wasn't subtle. The text shifts abruptly, dramatically. It says, then suddenly.
It signals a complete rupture in the reality of that inner prison.
And what happens is tectonic. I mean, we are talking about a response so violent that there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken.
The foundations, it didn't just rattle the lock on their door. It went after the foundational structure of the very building designed to hold them captive.
And that detail about the foundations is so crucial. Roman architecture, especially for prisons or military forts, relied on deep, solid foundations. A foundation represents stability, security, the absolute power of the Roman state.
So when the text says the foundations were shaken, it's saying the very stability of the system imprisoning them was compromised.
God doesn't just grant a subtle release. He physically shakes the structures of confinement. He targets the security system itself. This wasn't a random earthquake.
No, this was a supernatural targeted event.
And the specific results follow immediately. The source lists them out. First, the chains of Paul and Silas came loose.
Second, the doors flew open.
And third, and this is so important for what happens next, the text notes that the chains of all the prisoners also fell off.
Everyone.
Everyone in every cell was suddenly physically free.
This just solidifies that idea of causality we were talking about. The earthquake, the chains, the open doors, it was all a direct reaction to the sound of those hymns rising up at midnight.
But now, here comes the truly mind-boggling decision. The turning point that shifts this story from just a jailbreak into something much deeper.
Despite being completely physically free, chains gone, doors open, the jailer's asleep.
Paul and Silas do not run.
Wait a minute, just stop there. They were just flogged. Their backs are open wounds. They've been in stocks, in constant pain. The natural human survival instinct is to flee, get help, find safety. Why would they stay?
It's completely irrational from a human standpoint.
Entirely baffling.
And that's the point. They resisted the most basic instinct for self-preservation in favor of a higher mandate. They risked being caught again, which would mean an even harsher punishment.
But they understood something. They understood the earthquake wasn't just for them.
Exactly. If they had run, what would have happened?
Well, they would have gotten their own freedom.
And the jailer would have woken up, seen the empty cells, and immediately committed suicide to avoid the guaranteed death sentence and dishonor that came with losing prisoners.
So God wasn't just freeing prisoners.
He was saving a soul. He was setting the stage for the redemption of an entire family. By staying, Paul and Silas positioned themselves to fulfill God's ultimate purpose, the conversion of the jailer.
It's the moment their obedience moves from just passively enduring to actively ministering.
Yes.
They realized their temporary, excruciating suffering was the absolute setup for someone else's eternal breakthrough.
And they valued the soul of the jailer, the very man who had just brutalized them, more than they valued their own immediate comfort and safety.
That is profound.
It's a level of spiritual focus that is almost impossible to replicate. They had a golden opportunity for a total silent escape, and they turned it down because they knew their presence in that prison was critical for the next stage of the plan.
Let's focus on the jailer now. He wakes up, probably jolted by the earthquake, and he sees the prison doors wide open. What is going through his mind? And why is suicide his first instinct?
For a Roman jailer, especially one who is personally charged by the magistrates to guard these prisoners carefully, the stakes are absolute.
His life was on the line.
Under Roman military discipline, if you let a prisoner escape, you face the same penalty as the escaped convict. Sometimes worse. He knew his life was forfeit.
So drawing his sword, it isn't just an act of despair. It's him choosing the, quote, honorable way out.
It's the quickest way out of a guaranteed, drawn-out public execution and the shame that would fall on his family. He sees open doors, he assumes total failure, and he chooses a swift, personal death.
And it's in that split second of utter despair, where the man who chained Paul is about to kill himself, that Paul intervenes.
The timing is critical, and what he shouts is so precise, so loaded with mercy. The text says Paul shouts, "Don't harm yourself, we are all here."
The power in that shout is immense. It's not just information, it's an act of profound mercy toward his own tormentor.
The jailer was expecting chaos, escape, violence. Instead, he hears a voice confirming a physical impossibility. They're all still there. The man he beat and locked in stocks just saved his life.
The shock must have been overwhelming. He realizes two things at once. First, a supernatural event just happened. And second, these prisoners have a moral character, a mercy that is completely beyond his understanding.
He is stripped bare, not of his clothes, but of his pride, his competence, his trust in the Roman system. He's completely undone.
The source says he calls for lights, rushes in, and falls trembling at their feet.
And his very first question is the ultimate proof that the midnight praise and the non-escape worked. He doesn't ask, "How did you do that?"
Or, "Why did you stay?"
No. His question cuts straight to the heart of the matter. He asks, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?"
That one question shows he understood. He knew that if these men had the power to command nature, to shake foundations, and yet had the moral restraint not to seek revenge or even escape, they held the key to a freedom far greater than just getting out of a cell.
He recognized the divine, and he immediately wanted in. He wanted the salvation they possess.
And Paul gives him the clear, direct answer: believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household.
And the breakthrough has arrived. The sacrifice of their comfort has paid off for the destiny of this entire family.
The immediate fruits of this obedience are just staggering, especially when you remember the violence that happened just a few hours earlier.
It's an instantaneous shift. From incarceration to community, right there in the middle of the night, the jailer's whole role reverses.
He takes them out of the prison area, and the source makes a point to say that he washes their wounds.
Reversing his previous function as their punisher, he becomes their caretaker, their minister, their brother.
The healing is immediate, physically and spiritually. And that same night, the cycle of pain is broken.
A new spiritual reality is born. Paul and Silas share the word with his entire family, and they're all baptized. Joy fills a house that had only known the sound of chains and despair.
This lets us fully synthesize that third open loop, and it's maybe the hardest spiritual lesson for us to grapple with. What if God delays removing your pain? Because someone else's salvation depends on your endurance and obedience in that pain.
That is the powerful, outward-focused reality of their suffering. Their deliverance was delayed just long enough for the jailer to witness their miraculous faith and their even more miraculous mercy.
If they had run, the jailer would have died, believing there was no hope.
But because they stayed, he and his entire household found salvation. That prison wasn't just a place of pain, it was the sacred altar where a soul was redeemed. And the faith of Paul and Silas was the necessary catalyst.
Their story isn't just a personal testimony of resilience, it's a public, corporate act of redemption. It shows that sometimes our personal breakthrough is intrinsically tied to someone else's destiny.
That's right.
So let's synthesize the deeper lessons from all this. What does this deep dive teach us about, the structure of spiritual breakthrough? The first key lesson has to be that praise isn't just an emotional release, it's a weapon.
Absolutely. Paul and Silas showed that when you're stripped of every physical weapon, escape routes, legal options, the weapon of worship is still there. When they shifted the atmosphere from despair to worship, they were actively engaging in spiritual warfare.
They were inviting heaven's intervention.
Yes, and causing the physical structures of adversity to react violently. Worship wasn't passive, it was the active ingredient that made the foundations shake.
And the second lesson is just undeniable. Worship invites that intervention. This wasn't a waiting game for them. They didn't just endure. They took counterintuitive action, and that action forced a reaction from the divine.
And the third lesson, which really covers the whole arc of the story, is that obedience in suffering unlocks destiny. Their obedience in staying put, in prioritizing the jailer's salvation over their own escape. That was the hinge that the jailer's entire eternal destiny turned on.
If they had prioritized their own comfort, they would have forfeited that greater mission.
They would have.
I think we need to go back to that distinction we made earlier between surrender and petition, because it's so critical for anyone trying to apply this.
It's intensely difficult. When we're suffering, our natural instinct is to petition. God, change my circumstances, get me out of debt, heal this illness, make this waiting stop.
We're escape planning.
We are. Paul and Silas chose a path of radical surrender. They didn't demand an escape. They prayed through surrender, yielding their will, their pain, their whole predicament to God.
And that kind of surrender means you're releasing control over the method and the timing of the deliverance.
Exactly. They were essentially saying, we trust your plan, even if it requires us to sing hymns while we're bleeding in stocks.
And because they surrendered the outcome, God was able to handle all the complex pieces, the chains, the doors, the earthquake, and the heart of the man who had ordered their pain.
Their surrender was the key that allowed God to activate the supernatural forces needed to achieve the ultimate goal, which was never just about their own comfort.
It's such a powerful shift in perspective. If we only petition, we're focused on our own outcome. If we surrender, we align ourselves with God's ultimate outcome, which is often so much bigger and involves the destiny of people around us.
And this understanding really brings the whole narrative into focus when you look at supporting scripture, like Psalm 34.19.
Which says, "Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all."
That verse gets quoted a lot, but Acts 16 gives it this visceral, real-world context. The verse doesn't promise no affliction.
No, it promises many. The flogging, the stocks, the inner prison, those were the many afflictions.
And the promise is that the Lord delivers him out of them all. The story in Acts shows us the process. Deliverance didn't come before the praise. The afflictions came first. The praise was the mechanism of faith that then preceded the deliverance.
The breakthrough came because of their worship, not before it. And certainly not in the absence of suffering.
It validates the promise of that psalm in the most dramatic, foundation-shaking way possible.
So let's bring this forward. What does this mean for you, listening to this deep dive right now? We have to connect this ancient story to modern struggles. We have to ask, what prison are you in right now?
Your prison might not be a Roman jail with iron bars, but the psychological and emotional barriers can be just as restrictive, can't they? Fear can be an inner prison. It isolates you from risk, it paralyzes you, it's dark, it's cold, and it locks your emotional feet in stocks.
Or depression. chronic anxiety. That can feel just like that dark, cold inner prison where the very foundation of your hope feels like it's eroding day by day. You feel immobile, unable to see the light.
Financial debt can chain you just as effectively as those stocks did, locking you into endless worry, constant labor. Grief can be an immobilization, forcing you into a constant state of pain where you just can't find release or movement.
Even just waiting for the next season of your life or your career, that can be as painful as being locked up, because it feels like your time is being wasted.
The application from this story is stark, but it's also incredibly empowering. Paul and Silas proved that the key to unlocking these modern prisons often isn't more escape planning or more intellectual maneuvering.
It's radical, counterintuitive praise in the darkness. It's choosing to activate the frequency of faith when everything around you is screaming despair and stagnation.
Think about the cognitive shift that requires. When you start praising God in the middle of despair, you're creating a kind of dissonance. Your physical reality is saying, I am chained and hurting, but your vocal declaration is saying, I am free and God is sovereign.
And that dissonance is the spiritual fuel that activates intervention. It's the difference between focusing on the pain and focusing on the promise.
The lesson is clear. When you elevate worship above worry, you activate intervention. You are telling your circumstances, your debt, your fear, your depression, that your current situation is temporary and that the God you serve is active, even when you can't see the exit door.
You change the atmosphere, and the atmosphere changes your situation.
And this is a practical, spiritual discipline. It's not about feeling happy. It's about choosing obedience and trust when everything is screaming for distrust. It's about recognizing that even if the earthquake doesn't happen today, your praise is still being heard by someone else, that unwilling audience who needs to witness your resilience.
So let's summarize this incredible transformation one last time. Just remember, the distance they traveled in that one single night. Paul and Silas walked in that prison in chains, flogged, with zero hope of human rescue.
And they chose to activate their faith at midnight.
And they walked out with so much more than just their physical freedom. They walked out with souls. The jailer, his wife, his children redeemed, baptized, part of a new community of faith.
They traded their personal physical suffering for the eternal destiny of an entire household. The depth of their obedience resulted in this profound multi-generational harvest.
Their sacrifice really does become a template for us. It confirms that God's focus is always holistic. He cares about your pain, of course, but He cares even more about the redemptive purpose your pain can serve for others.
Which leaves us with a final challenge, a question to carry with you after this deep dive is done.
What if your breakthrough is waiting entirely on your worship? What if the key to your current situation isn't more escape planning, but radical praise? What if you're meant to use this dark season as your loudest testimony for someone else who is still waiting to ask, what must I do to be saved?
And that really is the final implication we want to leave with you. Your midnight is not the end of your story. When praise rises from the dark, God still shakes foundations. The structure of your circumstance, whether it's fear or debt or grief, it might just be about to give way because the sound of your surrender has reached heaven's ear. Your breakthrough is activated by faith in the dark.